Askreddit asks flight attendants and pilots of Reddit, what are some things that happen mid-flight that only the crew are aware of?
There's a special frequency called GARD that all aircraft are supposed to monitor. It's for emergencies, or for when an aircraft ends up on a wrong frequency and the controllers need to get contact with them to change them to the right frequency. It's full of pilots meowing at each other. And people accidentally asking for gate assignments and making other radio calls.
Pilot here, late to the party as usual. But sometimes the passengers may be having a nice quiet flight in the back while the pilots are up front dodging thunderstorms and yelling their heads off. We will not only transport dead bodies, but also live transplants, like hearts and lungs. I particularly like the live transplants because we get to cut to the front of the line for takeoff and we get all the shortcuts to our destination. Tip for those who get motion sickness: try not to move your head around. Pilots move their eyes instead of their heads to look at the instruments in the flight deck. Also try to sit in a seat over the wing. This area of the plane doesn't rotate as much during climbs and descents. Flight attendants can't do pilots' job, but pilots can't do flight attendants' jobs for sure. We aren't hired for our people skills. Don't take off your shoes to go to the bathroom. People pee on the floor all the time. Edit. Wow, y'all rock. Thanks for the gold, guys. Blue skies and tailwinds.
Pilot here. We only get paid when the doors are closed and the pushback has commenced. If we're delayed or sitting with the door open, we're just as annoyed as you are. At altitude we're constantly in contact with air traffic control and change to different center frequencies or control for other than US locations. We're also doing fuel checks to make sure the fuel burn isn't abnormal. Dodging weather. And probably bitching about scheduling.
Out of curiosity, how often do you talk with dispatch during an average flight? Was actually thinking of becoming one for a while.
Pilots are on their phones or reading the newspaper all the time.
Oftentimes they're browsing Reddit.
That's not really scary. Autopilot.
Pilot is sleeping and co-pilot is flying and there are dead bodies in the cargo. Source: my mom, who is a former flight attendant.
On longer flights, bigger airplanes, they even have a special room where the flight crew can get some sleep.
Sounds pretty normal, to be honest. Bodies get repatriated by air all the time. Pilots need to sleep, and that's what co-pilots are for.
An instructor told me that he and his training buddy both fell asleep for about 45 minutes at the same time. While gaining hours for licensing, the plane was in complete autopilot mode. Clear skies, zero turbulence. They both swore if they ever flew again they would hand off sleep like handing off the controls did for further context. He told me that after both of them awoke, they were fucking terrified. Neither had no idea what had happened, even if anything had happened. Luckily, it was over the Gulf of Mexico and at a low enough altitude where it wouldn't impact commercial airliners. Their trim was set before the nap, so they only gained a couple hundred feet of altitude. But rest assured, each were not happy with themselves. They immediately contacted ATC, verified their position, and turned around to go back to the airport, white palming the yoke the entire way. Oh, and this was at night too, they needed the night experience. Edit 2. They were in a Cessna 152. This wasn't an oxygen issue. It was just two buddies not communicating with each other and both assuming the other was flying at 3. You're right. C-152s don't have autopilot. By autopilot I meant trim, which would confuse people. They were also very lucky the trim was set to gain altitude, not lower. I was just speaking in layman terms for the non-pilots to understand better. Like I said, they were definitely thoroughly freaked out and both admitted how badly they fucked up.
The scariest moment of my day is when the FA opens the internal bag door, the closet we all throw our overnight bags in, without calling us in the flight deck first. That ding and master caution gets me every time.
Airplane be like, oh shit, someone opened a fucking internal door. Wait, why is that something that needs an alarm?
I've got an original one for you all. There is a radio frequency we all are required to monitor. It's called GUARD. It's for emergency use and is designed for maydays. And for air traffic control to reach aircraft that may have lost radio contact. Or to relay messages from aircraft to other aircraft, etc.
Every day this frequency is abused. You will hear hundreds of professional aviators meowing,
yelling obscenities at each other, and making fun of one airline or another. Oftentimes what will start it is some poor guy accidentally transmitting his PA announcement to passengers on the GUARD frequency. Followed by the very mature outbreaks for about 5 to 10 minutes. It's the worst on the East Coast. Edit. Just today I heard an airline aircraft trying to relay info about a medical emergency on this frequency through one of their fellow company aircraft. They couldn't finish any of the sentences without people yelling, "You're on GUARD, hey nobody cares about your passenger, hey you're on guard 2A.
I've seen the meowing mentioned a few times. What's up with that?
My uncle was a pilot. He says that most people don't understand how much of the airplane is run by computers. The pilots are necessary, but a lot of the elements of flying are automated nowadays.
There's a joke about the Airbus A380 that goes, the A380 comes with a pilot and a dog. The pilot is there to feed the dog. The dog is there to bark at the pilot if he tries to touch anything.
That's so weird. My dad was a commercial pilot and he said the opposite. You might use a computer to help you do your job at work, but does it replace you? No. It just assists you do your job better.
A former teacher told us a story that fits the question. Every year he would make trips to Europe that were for an educational experience, or related to the subject he taught in one way or another. In reality, it was just an amazing way to spend 2 weeks in Europe. One year he took a student's brother with, since he needed an extra person to have the minimum amount of required students. After the 10-hour flight, the flight attendant walks up to him and asks if said brother was a part of his group. He says yes. Apparently, on the flight he stopped the flight attendant and asked her to have sex with him in the bathroom. She denied, but he continued to ask her several more times through the flight. It reached a point to where she no longer felt anywhere near comfortable. She asked my teacher if she could notify the authorities and have him sent back to the States. He agreed. There were no immediate flights back home, so a distant relative of his had to be contacted. He stayed with a relative he had never even met for an entire weekend. He was then put on a flight back home the following week. TLDR kid repeatedly asks flight attendant to have sex with him during his 10-hour flight. She contacts authorities. He gets sent back. Edit 1. Spelling.
Flight attendants don't get paid on the ground. Only flying hours are paid. We are slave labor on the ground and duties are continually added to our unpaid work time because the company knows they don't have to pay us. We show up 2 to 3 hours before we even start getting paid, and some days we will work up to 14 hours and only get paid for 5 or 6 of those hours. It should be illegal. Please be kind when you are boarding the plane and getting all pissy about your bags, etc. The flight attendant is a volunteer while she is helping you on the ground. She is essentially doing you a favor.
I don't understand how this is legal, or how it's justified.
A lady who was feeling very ill crapped her pants mid-flight. A very kind FA managed to get her covered in a blanket and into the bathroom with barely anyone noticing, and then gave her a pair of her own pants to wear so she wouldn't be embarrassed.
This started off with us blissfully unaware, ended with mild pant shitting. I was flying to France in one of those planes with the TV screen up front to show the flight path and where you currently are. I was just about to fall asleep when the captain asked over the PA if there was a doctor on board and if they could go to seat hash. I knew this was bad. The flight path changed to Canada and we had to make an emergency landing. We were stuck there for 2 hours. When we finally got to France, his entire row was quarantined off. I have no idea what the fuck happened.
I'm an airline pilot. When things happen like diversions and such, I always like to be blunt with passengers and keep them in the loop. But with a medical situation, I would be very hesitant to divulge details out of respect for the person involved.
FA here. At mid-flight I noticed a strange thing with one of the slides was not armed properly and had an issue with it. However, we landed safely and nobody of the packs knew nothing.
What's a slide?
In the doors there is an emergency slide in case of evacuation. It requires to be armed before taking off.
Switch doors to armed and cross-check. Please. No idea what that means except that I fly too much.
Pilot here. Most of the time the passengers are not given the full answer on why a flight is delayed or cancelled. Airlines will typically blame cancellations on unrelated events, weather, instead of mechanical issues, so they don't have to pay for hotel rooms, meals, etc. Also, chemtrails are not real. For those of you who believe they are real, give your head a shake. 1 split second of instinct combined with piloting skill decides if you land on the runway or on the side of it. Most of the runways are 45 meters wide, and on a gusty summer afternoon or during thunderstorms I take God's name more than Pope himself. 2. A smooth landing is not necessarily a good landing. One can make a smooth landing and it will feel good for passengers, but it could be a risky landing if the pilot decides to use extra runway. Never shout at your pilot for a bad landing unless he crash lands. And if he crash lands and you can shout at him, understand that you are alive because of him. Edit. For clarity. And thanks for my first gold. Anonymous Redditor. As you know Justice said. Better thump it onto the touchdown zone than grease it on 2/3 of the way down the runway. Bonus fact. Many a times aircrafts coming in to land go back up in the air. This is a scary experience for many as engines, after being relatively quiet for a while, roar back to life and aircraft is pulled back up. This is called a go-around. This happens because either the runway is not clear, weather is something that can't be negotiated properly for landing, or the pilot is not at the right place and right configuration. Go-around is something that is emphasized by all the senior trainers and authorities, as it is better to go back up in the air than to be in a precarious position while forcing in to land. So whenever your pilot does a go-around, be happy that he is a safe pilot.
As an air traffic controller, we are constantly swearing and yelling at pilots when we're not on the frequency, and then when we key up we use our nice guy voices.
I worked with a pilot that was really old. He couldn't stay awake in flight. The first officer kept having to poke him and wake him up. We kept feeding him black coffee, but it didn't help much. I asked him if he was retiring soon, but he said he couldn't afford it because our airline has no pension program and the pay scale is pathetic. Pretty scary.
Except, the mandatory retirement age is 65, isn't it?
Correct, and it's enforced.
Most airplanes don't even have a phalange.
Her friend has a feeling something's wrong with the left phalange.
There is no phalange.
Oh my god, this plane doesn't even have a phalange.
One of my all-time favorites is the captain accidentally broadcasting his passenger briefing, "Welcome aboard. Weather in Chicago," and so on frequency instead of the aircraft PA system. Blocking up ground, ramp, tower, etc. for a solid 15 seconds. You automatically become the laughingstock of the airport.
We Saturday in a backed-up queue for hours in Denver one time. The weather had the airport socked in. Nobody was going anywhere until this giant supercell cleared the end of the runway. During that time, suddenly there appeared a mechanic at the front of the cabin on the PA holding up a 2-foot-long piece of metal he had pulled from one of the tires. He explained if the plane hadn't been sitting waiting he might have never spotted it. It could have come flying out during takeoff roll and penetrated the plane's wing, igniting fuel, or whatever. Everyone cheered him. What a hero. He possibly saved our lives. To this day I have no idea why they let him come on board and tell us this.
To make you less pissed about the delay.
Ex-airline employee here. Often we'd have someone on board with terrible body odor. You can set the temperature in one end of the cabin hotter and it localized the smell to one part of the plane. If you see coffee filter bags hanging anywhere, it's because someone smells like open ass somewhere on the plane. FAs often talk about the hot guy in 23B, or whatever seat he's in. Pilots fuck around a lot up front. They'll take pictures, post on FB, watch movies. Automation has taken over a lot of the work on long flights. Edit. Not really on topic, but don't ever walk barefoot or in socks on an airplane. The same mop that mops the lav, mops the galley.
My cousin is a flight attendant. It's not mid-flight, but airplane lines will fly attendants all over the country just in case they're needed elsewhere. My cousin had to fly out from Portland to Seattle and some other places all in one trip. Never having to work. Also, if you are sick you have to show up anyway and let the people in charge decide if you can fly or not. If you don't, you get 3 warnings then you're fired.
I've had a flight delayed because they were flying in more flight attendants whose flight was also delayed. This was like 2 days after the underwear bomber.
OMG. Could you imagine being a flight attendant on a plane full of flight attendants?
Pilot and co-pilot are exchanging files and playing video games together via Wi-Fi.
Untrue. Most of my captains aren't nearly that tech-savvy.
Airbus.
Not sure if it's been mentioned already. I was learning to be cabin crew at college, and in the event that someone dies on board, the CC cabin crew make it less obvious that they have passed. Put glasses on them, maybe a hat, essentially dress them up as subtle as possible to not alert and or panic the other passengers. Please don't disturb my friend. He's dead tired.
Weekend at Bernie's.
FA here, crop dusting. Basically farting whilst we walk down the aisle due to the bloating. If you fly frequently there's a high chance an FA has farted right by your head as they walk down the aisle.
This is another reason I always go for the window seat.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to support the channel, and above all, have an excellent day you wonderful people.